What do you do when the silence of heaven lasts for years? When every tear feels unnoticed and every prayer returns unanswered? Hannah knew that silence. But what she didn't know was that her pain was planting a miracle. Welcome to Midnight Psalms, where the darkest nights become the beginning of divine stories. Here we journey through quiet battles, whispered prayers, and sacred encounters that happen when the world is asleep, but heaven is awake. Hannah lived with an ache no one could see, but one she carried every day like a weight tied to her soul. In a culture where children were seen as blessings from God, her empty arms were more than just a private sorrow, they were a public shame. People whispered. Some judged. Others pitied. But year after year, as her husband's other wife bore child after child, Hannah's womb remained silent. She didn't just want a child, she longed for the kind of hope only a child could bring. And yet, no matter how much she wept, heaven seemed unmoved. Each year, their family would travel to Shiloh to worship and sacrifice to the Lord. It should have been a holy celebration, but for Hannah, it was a reminder of her unanswered prayers. A reminder of the questions no one dared to ask her out loud. What have you done to deserve this silence? Even her husband, Elkanah, tried to comfort her with love that couldn't fill the void. Am I not better to you than 10 sons? He'd ask. But Hannah didn't need 10 husbands. She needed one miracle. On one of those trips to Shiloh, Hannah broke. She slipped away from the noise, the rituals, the expectations. And in the shadow of the tabernacle, she poured her soul out like water. Words didn't come, just silent, trembling lips and a heart that had been cracked open by years of longing. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't praying for show. This was raw, sacred desperation. And in that silent storm, God was listening. As Hannah prayed, Eli the priest noticed her. But instead of seeing a woman in worship, he assumed she was drunk. He rebuked her harshly, not realizing he was witnessing one of the most honest prayers the tabernacle had ever held. Hurt but not offended, Hannah responded with grace. I am not drunk, she said. I've been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Eli, now understanding, shifted his tone. Go in peace, he told her, and may the God of Israel grant your request. Something changed in Hannah that day. She left that place without a child, but not without peace. The weight didn't disappear, but her posture shifted. For the first time in years, her face was no longer downcast. That's the kind of peace only God can give, not the peace that follows the miracle, but the peace that precedes it. She trusted that God had heard her, even if she didn't yet see the evidence. In time, the impossible happened. Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, which means heard by God. Every time she called his name, she remembered, not just the pain but the promise. Not just the silence but the one who had been listening the entire time. Samuel wasn't just a child. He was a testimony. A reminder that heaven hears the cries we whisper in the dark. But Hannah's story doesn't end with answered prayer. What makes her journey even more powerful is what she did after the blessing. She had promised God that if he gave her a son, she would dedicate him to the Lord all his life. And she kept that promise. After weaning Samuel, she returned to Shiloh, not with empty arms but with an open heart. She placed her long-awaited son in God's service. It was a sacrifice few would make, especially after waiting so long. That moment of surrender wasn't weakness, it was worship. Hannah wasn't giving Samuel away. She was giving him back. She recognized that the gift had never truly been hers to keep. And as she released him, she worshipped. Not with tears of sorrow but with a song of praise. Her pain had produced more than a child. It had produced a legacy. Samuel would grow up to become one of Israel's greatest prophets, a voice that would shape kings and call nations back to God. And God didn't forget Hannah. He saw her sacrifice. He honored her faithfulness. The woman once called barren would go on to have more children, sons and daughters who filled her home and her heart. But none would ever carry the story quite like Samuel. He was her first answer, her miracle born from mourning. And through him, God would move in ways she could never have imagined during those quiet, bitter nights. Hannah's journey is not just the story of a barren woman who got what she asked for. It's the story of a God who writes beauty into the blank spaces. A God who listens to silent prayers. A God who doesn't rush the miracle but also doesn't waste the wait. So if you're still in the middle, still weeping, still wondering if he hears you, remember Hannah. Her tears were not in vain. And neither are yours. Hannah teaches us that delay does not mean denial. She wasn't ignored by heaven, she was being shaped by it. Her identity wasn't defined by her barrenness, but by her persistence. Even in humiliation. Even when misunderstood. Even when year after year passed with nothing to show but tears and more questions. Her faith wasn't loud, but it was rooted. And that kind of faith, quiet, consistent, and surrendered, can shake heaven in ways the world will never fully see. Sometimes the most powerful prayers are the ones we whisper through tears. Hannah didn't perform. She didn't rehearse elegant words or pretend she was fine. She brought her brokenness exactly as it was. And in that honesty she met the God who sees. The God who understands not only what we say but what we can't say. Some prayers don't need words, they just need surrender. That's what Hannah gave. And that's what heaven honored. In a time where women's voices were often overlooked, God chose Hannah's pain as the starting point of prophetic change. Her son, Samuel, wouldn't just be a boy who made her smile again. He would be the one who anointed kings, the one who heard God's voice clearly in a nation full of noise. But it all started in silence, in shadows, in the heartbreak of a mother whose story almost didn't get told. God didn't just use her, He honored her. There's something holy about pain when it's handed to God. We don't always understand the delays, the closed doors, the years that seem to mock our prayers. But Hannah shows us what it looks like to hold on, not with clenched fists but with open hands. She didn't manipulate God. She didn't force His hand. She trusted that if He gave her a no, it was still good. And if He gave her a yes, it would be sacred. That's not weakness, that's worship. Maybe you're in your own Shiloh right now. Not the place but the moment. You've been carrying your prayer for years, watching others get their blessings while you sit in silence. You've smiled through gritted teeth. You've answered the "when will it be your turn?" questions with a polite nod while your soul screams. Let Hannah remind you, your turn is not forgotten. And your tears are not wasted. Heaven sees what others overlook. And when the answer does come, because for some, it will you give it back to God like Hannah did? Will you hold the blessing loosely, knowing it was never truly yours to begin with? That kind of surrender is rare. But it's the kind of surrender that changes generations. Hannah's faith didn't end with her son. It began with him. Her legacy was not just Samuel, but the obedience that made room for Samuel to rise. It's easy to celebrate when the miracle arrives. But Hannah praised God before she was pregnant. Her worship came from trust, not from results. And that is what made it powerful. We live in a world obsessed with outcomes. But Hannah's story shows us that faith is about presence. God's presence with us in the pain, not just in the deliverance. When you know He's there, even the silence becomes sacred. So many people want the Samuel moment, but few are willing to walk through the Hannah season. The waiting, the ridicule, the surrender. But it's in those dark, hidden places that God is writing the most unforgettable stories. Maybe your miracle hasn't come yet, but maybe it's being formed, shaped in the womb of waiting. And when it's born, it won't just be for you. It will carry purpose far greater than what you imagined. Tonight, as you lay down, maybe in silence, maybe in sorrow, remember this: God is closer than you feel. He hears the prayers you've stopped praying out loud. He sees the longing you've learned to hide. And He is not indifferent. He is not late. He is preparing something eternal in what feels like an endless delay. If Hannah could speak to you, maybe she'd say, "Hold on. The God who heard me still hears." And if this story whispered to something deep in you tonight, maybe you've been Hannah too. Maybe you still are. And maybe that's okay. Because her story didn't end in weeping, it ended in worship. And so can yours. If this touched your heart, Midnight Psalms is here for moments like this. Subscribe if you want to walk with us through the midnight hours, where healing, hope, and heaven meet. There's more to come. And you're not alone.